Blood on the asphalt, a screaming engine fading into the freezing rain. When an exhausted ER nurse pulled over to help a dying man, she didn't just save a life. She saved a legendary member of the Hells Angels. What followed was a terrifying conspiracy, a deadly target on her back, and the most badass motorcycle escort in history. They asked me if I have regrets. Stopping that night on Interstate 880, saving a stranger I'd never met, facing down a killer with nothing but a phone and a bluff. I'll tell you the story, every brutal, beautiful moment of it. Then you can decide for yourself. But first, let me take you back to where it started. Not on that rain-soaked highway, not in the moment the Harley-Davidson collided with the concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. No, it started 5 years earlier on a different highway with a different girl who never made it home. Her name was Jenny Brennan. She was 16 years old. She was my little sister. It was Interstate 5 just south of Stockton, a Saturday afternoon in October. Jenny was driving home from a volleyball tournament. Her team had won. She called me from the road laughing, singing along to some pop song I'd never heard of. She was happy. She was alive. She was 17 minutes from home. The California Highway Patrol report said the truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. His semi drifted across 2 lanes and clipped Jenny's Honda Accord at the rear quarter panel. The physics were simple and merciless. Her car spun out, rolled 3 times, and came to rest upside down in the center divider. She didn't die instantly. That's what haunts me. She didn't die on impact. The coroner's report estimated she survived for 12 to 15 minutes after the crash. Conscious, aware, bleeding internally from a ruptured spleen. 17 cars passed her in those 12 minutes. 17 drivers saw the wreckage, saw the smoke, saw the teenage girl trapped inside, and 17 people kept driving. Maybe they were later for dinner. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Maybe they thought someone else would stop. No one did. By the time a highway maintenance worker finally called 911, Jenny had bled out alone in the dark, upside down, waiting for help that never came. I was 23 years old. I was finishing my nursing degree at UC Davis. I got the call from my father at 7:42 in the evening. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock on the wall of the library, wondering why he was calling so late, wondering why his voice sounded like that. I didn't go back to school for 3 months. When I did, I changed everything. I've been planning to go into pediatrics. Comfortable, predictable, good hours. Instead, I specialized in emergency trauma. I wanted to be the person who showed up when everything was falling apart. I wanted to be the one who stopped. That oath, that promise I made to Jenny's memory became the axis my entire life rotated around. Every shift, every patient, every time I heard sirens, I thought of her. I thought of those 12 minutes. I thought of 17 people who chose not to stop. I swore I would never be number 18. 5 years later, I was Evangeline Brennan. Most people called me Eva. I was 28 years old. I worked as a trauma nurse in the emergency room at Oakland General Hospital, one of the busiest level 1 trauma centers in Northern California. Gunshot wounds, stabbings, car accidents, overdoses. I'd seen it all. I'd held the hands of dying gang members and suburban soccer moms with equal compassion. I'd pronounced death. I'd witnessed miracles. I'd learned that the line between those 2 outcomes was often thinner than people wanted to believe. It was a Tuesday night, actually technically Wednesday morning by the time my shift was winding down. I'd been on the floor for 14 hours straight. We'd had 3 gunshot victims from a drive-by shooting in East Oakland, a construction worker with a rebar through his abdomen, and a 4-year-old pulled from the bottom of a swimming pool. The kid had survived barely. We'd gotten a pulse back after 9 minutes of CPR. 9 minutes. His brain was likely damaged, but he was breathing. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. My feet ached. My back ached. There was a persistent ringing in my ears from the trauma bay alarms that had been screaming on and off all night. I smelled like antiseptic blood and the burnt coffee smell of the break room where I'd consumed 3 cups of something that tasted like battery acid just to stay upright. Dr. Catherine Vale found me in the staff locker room as I was changing out of my scrubs. Catherine was 50 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and the best trauma surgeon I'd ever worked with. She'd been my mentor since my first day at Oakland General. She was the closest thing I had to a mother figure after my own mom had passed 2 years prior. "You look like hell, Brennan," Catherine said, leaning against the doorframe. "You say the sweetest things," I replied, pulling on my jeans. "Go home. Sleep. The world will still be broken tomorrow. That's a comforting thought. Catherine's expression softened. You did good work tonight. That kid is alive because you didn't give up. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice right then. The kid's mother had hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. She'd sobbed into my shoulder, thanking me over and over. I'd held her and said nothing because there was nothing to say. I'd just done what Jenny never got. I'd stopped. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my bag, and headed for the parking garage. It was 2:30 in the morning. The hospital hallways were quieter now, that strange liminal hour when the night shift settles into a rhythm and the world outside holds its breath before dawn. My car was a beat-up Honda Civic, 12 years old, with a dent in the rear bumper and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. It wasn't much, but it was paid off and it got me where I needed to go. I tossed my bag in the passenger seat and started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed a harsh green. 2:41 a.m. All I wanted was my bed, my cat Pepper, 12 uninterrupted hours of sleep. I never got them. The rain started as I merged onto Interstate 88. Oh, heading south. Not a gentle drizzle. This was Northern California winter rain, the kind that comes down in relentless, angry sheets and turns highways into black mirrors. My windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle. I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The highway was nearly empty. Just me, a few long-haul trucks, and the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite direction. I had my high beams on both hands on the wheel, leaning forward like that would somehow help me see better. I was exhausted. Bone-deep, soul-tired, exhausted. My eyes were burning. My mind was already halfway to unconsciousness, playing that trick, where you're driving on autopilot and suddenly realize you don't remember the last 5 miles. That's when I heard it. Even through the rain, even through my closed windows, I heard it. The roar of a heavy motorcycle engine, loud and raw and defiant against the storm. It was behind me, closing fast. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a single headlight, bright and unwavering. A Harley Davidson, had to be. Nothing else sounded like that. The bike roared past me in the left lane, easily doing 70, maybe 80 miles per hour. I caught a glimpse of the rider, a big man in a leather cut, hunched low over the handlebars against the rain. Then he was gone, his taillight disappearing into the storm ahead. I shook my head. Crazy bastard riding in weather like this. But hey, not my business. I loosened my grip on the wheel and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That's when everything went to hell. It happened in a fraction of a second. Ahead of me, maybe a quarter mile up the highway, I saw the bike's headlight swerve violently to the right. Then the brake light flared, a desperate red scream in the darkness. Then the sound. Oh God, the sound. The screech of locked tires losing their grip on wet asphalt. The sickening metallic crunch of chrome and steel meeting concrete. A boom that shook the ground even from where I was. My heart stopped. My foot slammed on the brake. My Civic fishtailed wildly, the rear end swinging out as the tires struggled for purchase on the rain-slicked road. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, fighting to keep the car from spinning out completely. The world tilted. Time stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The car finally came to a halt on the muddy shoulder, half on the road, half on the dirt. My chest was heaving. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. Up ahead, through the button and the frantic sweep of my wipers, I saw it. A massive customized Harley Davidson lay on its side in the right lane, the front wheel twisted at an impossible angle. Sparks were still spitting from the scraped chrome as the engine sputtered and died. Broken glass glittered across the asphalt like scattered diamonds. And about 40 feet away from the wreckage in the middle of the fast lane, a crumpled figure lay motionless. Oh my God. Oh my God. Instinct overrode exhaustion. Instinct overrode fear. Instinct overrode every rational thought that said I should stay in my car, call 911, and wait for professionals. I didn't think about the danger of the dark highway. I didn't think about the freezing rain. I didn't think about the fact that I was a 120-pound woman alone on a deserted road at 3 in the morning. I thought about Jenny. I thought about 12 minutes. I thought about 17 people. I grabbed my phone. I grabbed the heavy trauma kit I kept in my trunk, a habit from my days working as an EMT before nursing school. Then I sprinted into the storm. The rain hit me like a physical blow. Within seconds, I was soaked to the bone, my hair plastered to my face, water streaming into my eyes. The wind was howling a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I could barely hear my own footsteps over the roar of the storm. I reached the figure in the road and dropped to my knees beside him. My trauma kit hit the asphalt with a heavy thud. The victim was a mountain of a man. He was easily 6'2", 250 pounds of muscle and ink and leather. He was dressed in heavy denim jeans and a leather vest, a cut that was rapidly darkening with a mixture of rainwater and blood. As I leaned over him, the headlights of a passing car illuminated the back of his vest for a split second. The red and white winged death's head stared back at me, flanked by bold rockers that read Hell's Angels in Oakland. His name patch read Iron. Hell's Angels. Jesus Christ. I just stopped to help a Hell's Angel, but he was also a human being who was dying. I pushed the panic down. I locked it away in the same mental compartment where I kept all the fear and doubt and exhaustion. I became the nurse. I became the professional. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted over the roar of the highway, pressing 2 fingers to the thick corded muscle of his neck, searching for a pulse. "My name is Eva. I'm a nurse. Stay with me." His pulse was there, but it was thready weak, a dying bird's flutter under my fingertips. His skin was cold. Too cold. I did a rapid visual assessment. His left leg was shattered bone protruding through the denim in a compound fracture that made my stomach clench. That was bad. That was very bad. But that wasn't what was killing him. A massive piece of jagged metal, part of the motorcycle's fairing, had pierced his right side just below the ribs. It had torn through the leather, through the denim, through skin and muscle, and it had severed an artery. Dark arterial blood was pulsing out in rhythmic, horrifying spurts, pooling beneath him and mixing with the rainwater. I did the math instantly. Femoral or iliac artery. Blood loss approximately 500 milliliters per minute. At that rate, he had less than 3 minutes before he bled out completely. Maybe less. He was already in class 3 hemorrhagic shock. Blood pressure had to be catastrophically low. His body was shutting down, prioritizing his brain and heart and letting everything else go dark. 3 minutes. That's all I had. "Stay with me," I screamed, tearing open my trauma kit. My hands were completely numb from the cold, but they moved with practiced, mechanical precision. Muscle memory. Thousands of hours of training taking over when my conscious mind wanted to freeze. I ripped open his leather vest. The snaps popped like gunshots. I tore open the shirt beneath, exposing the wound. Blood gushed out, warm and dark and unstoppable. I grabbed combat gauze, the expensive hemostatic kind that I kept in my kit for exactly this kind of catastrophic bleed. I tore open 3 packages and packed the wound, pushing the gauze deep into the torn flesh, following the track of the injury. The man Iron let out a guttural, wet groan. His eyes rolled back in his head. I could see the whites. "I know it hurts," I shouted, even though I wasn't sure he could hear me anymore. "I know, but I need you to stay with me." "Do you understand? Stay with me." I placed both hands over the packed wound and pushed down with my entire body weight, using my shoulder, my arms, every ounce of strength I had. I needed to compress the artery to stop the bleeding long enough for his body to clot, for help to arrive, for something, anything to buy him more time. Blood seeped between my fingers, warm and slick. The rain kept falling. My knees were soaked, pressed into the cold, wet asphalt. My arms were already shaking from the exertion. But I didn't let up. I couldn't let up. And that's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Through the rain, I saw a pair of blinding LED headlights appear in my peripheral vision. A vehicle was approaching from behind fast. For one brief, desperate moment, I thought it was help. Someone else who'd seen the crash. Someone with a phone, a blanket, another pair of hands. But the vehicle didn't slow down. It was a matte black SUV, large and aggressive with tinted windows. It blew past me, then slammed on its brakes about 100 yards up the highway. The reverse lights flared white. It was coming back. Relief washed over me. The driver had realized what happened. They were coming back to help. The SUV reversed quickly, tires spinning slightly on the wet pavement, and came to a screeching halt just a few yards away from where I knelt over Iron's body. The engine idled, a low, threatening rumble. The driver's side door swung open. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a lean, wiry build. He wore a dark trench coat that hung past his knees, and his face was shadowed beneath the hood. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't call out to ask if we needed help. He didn't run toward us with urgency or concern. Instead, he reached into the SUV and pulled out a heavy steel tire iron. Every survival instinct I had started screaming. The man walked toward us with a slow, deliberate, predatory pace. His boots splashed through the puddles. The tire iron hung loosely in his right hand, swinging slightly with each step. "Hey!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation and rising terror. "I need help. Call an ambulance." He didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He just kept walking, his eyes locked on Iron's unconscious body. He stepped into the halo of my car's headlights, and for a split second, the light caught his face full on. I saw him clearly, every detail burned into my memory with the kind of crystal clarity that trauma brings. He had a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, splitting it in two, and wrapping around his neck, vivid and unmistakable. Even in the dim light was a tattoo of a coiled rattlesnake wrapped around a dagger. The snake's mouth was open, fangs bared as if striking. His eyes were dead, completely, utterly dead. No panic, no remorse, no humanity, just cold, empty voids. He raised the tire iron. This wasn't a hit and run. This wasn't an accident. This was an assassination. And I was in the way. Panic exploded in my chest, raw and primal, flooding my veins with ice-cold adrenaline. My hands were still pressed down on Iron's wound, blood still pulsing between my fingers. I couldn't let go. If I let go, he died in 60 seconds. But if I didn't move, if I didn't run, if I didn't do something, this man was going to kill both of us. Think, Eva. Think. The man was 5 feet away. 4 feet. 3. I made a choice. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, my voice cracking and breaking with manufactured hysteria. The police are already on the line. Highway patrol is 1 mile away. I have your license plate. I have your face. I let go of Iron's wound with one hand, keeping pressure with the other, and I grabbed my phone from my jacket pocket. I held it up, the screen illuminated, praying he couldn't see that the only thing on it was my lock screen. "I have your face," I screamed again. "They're coming! They're almost here!" The man hesitated. For one agonizing second, he stopped walking. His eyes flicked from Iron's body to me, then to the phone in my hand, then to the dark highway behind him. He was calculating, weighing his options, deciding if I was bluffing. And then, faint and distant, but growing louder, I heard it. The wail of a siren, maybe an ambulance, maybe a police cruiser, maybe just a fire truck heading to some unrelated call. But it was there, echoing through the concrete canyon of the highway overpass half a mile away. The man heard it too. His jaw tightened. His scarred eyebrow twitched. He looked down at Iron, then back at me. He was deciding if he had enough time to finish what he'd started. He didn't. He sneered, a vicious twisting of his lips that had nothing to do with a smile. Then he spat on the asphalt inches from where I knelt and turned. He walked back to the SUV with the same deliberate, unhurried pace, climbed in, slammed the door. The engine roared. The tires spun, kicking up spray. And then the SUV accelerated hard, fishtailing slightly before it vanished into the rainy night like it had never been there at all. I collapsed forward, sobbing, gasping for air, but I never, not for 1 second, lifted my hands from Iron's wound. My entire body was shaking. My vision was blurring with tears and rain. But I kept pressure. I kept him alive. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of the paramedics finally cut through the darkness. The emergency room at Oakland General Hospital was a chaotic symphony of alarms, shouted orders, and rushing footsteps. Trauma bays 1 and 2 were occupied. Radiology was backed up. The waiting room was packed with people who'd been there for hours and would be there for hours more. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I was covered in Iron's blood. My scrubs were soaked. My jacket was ruined. I'd been wrapped in a foil thermal blanket by one of the paramedics, and I sat in the corner of Trauma Bay 3, watching the surgical team work frantically to stabilize the man I'd pulled back from the edge. His name, I'd learned, was Declan Gallagher. Declan Iron Gallagher, 45 years old, member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, Oakland chapter, road captain. He'd lost a catastrophic amount of blood. The initial transfusion had been 6 units. They'd keep going until his hemoglobin stabilized. He had a shattered femur, 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and the arterial tear I'd packed in the field. But the combat gauze had worked. The pressure I'd applied had worked. I'd kept him tethered to the living world long enough for the paramedics to get IV access, for the trauma surgeons to get him into the OR. Dr. Catherine Vale had taken the lead. She'd looked at me when they'd wheeled Declan in, still unconscious, still ghostly pale, and she'd said, "You did this. He's alive because of you." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I was going to throw up. It was 4:15 in the morning when the atmosphere in the hospital changed, drastically, irrevocably. It started as a vibration, a low, deep rumble that I felt in the soles of my shoes before I actually heard it. The floor was shaking, the windows were rattling in their frames. It grew louder and louder. A thunderous, deafening roar that made conversations stop mid-sentence and heads turned toward the windows. Outside the glass doors of the emergency room entrance, dozens of heavy motorcycle engines were shutting off simultaneously. I walked to the waiting room. My legs felt like they were made of jelly. The automatic doors slid open and the night air poured in damp and cold, followed by a sea of leather-heavy boots and patches. There were at least 40 men, maybe more. Massive, imposing figures with faces that looked like they'd been carved from stone and fists that looked like they could break bones. They were flooding into the sterile white waiting area, their boots echoing on the tile, their presence sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The sudden influx of Hell's Angels silenced the entire emergency room. Nurses paused mid-step. Security guards nervously adjusted their belts, hands hovering near radios they knew would be useless. Patients in the waiting room shrank back in their plastic chairs. At the front of the pack was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite. He was easily 6'4" with broad shoulders that seemed to take up half the doorway. He had a thick gray beard braided in places and eyes that had seen decades of street warfare. His leather cut was covered in patches, pins, and insignia that I didn't understand but instinctively knew commanded respect. His name patch identified him as the chapter president. His road name was Brick. Victor "Brick" Maddox walked directly up to the triage desk. The young receptionist behind the counter looked like she was about to faint. She was maybe 22 years old, and she was staring up at this towering, battle-scarred biker like he was a Viking who just walked out of a history book. "Sir," she stammered, her voice shaking. You can't all be in here. This is a hospital. There are rules about." Brick didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The gravelly timbre of it, low and controlled and carrying the weight of absolute authority, cut through every other sound in the room. "One of our brothers was brought in," Brick said. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that meant he was holding back a storm. "Declan Gallagher, iron. We're not leaving until we know he's breathing." "Sir, I understand, but hospital policy, we're not leaving." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The sky is blue, water is wet. The Hells Angels are not leaving this hospital. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was adrenaline crash. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent the last 90 minutes kneeling in the rain, holding a stranger's artery closed, while a killer stood 5 feet away. But I stepped forward. "I'm the one who brought him in," I said. The massive crowd of bikers turned. 40 pairs of eyes fell on me. I was still clutching my foil blanket around my shoulders. I was still covered in blood. Declan's blood, dark and dried on my hands, my arms, my scrubs. The crowd parted instantly. Like the Red Sea, they stepped aside, creating a clear path between me and Brick Maddox. Brick walked toward me. His heavy boots thudded on the tile. His shadow seemed to swallow the fluorescent lights. He stopped in front of me, towering over my 5'5" frame, and for one terrifying second, I didn't know what to expect. Then Brick took off his heavy leather gloves, tucked them into his belt, and reached out. He took my small, blood-stained hands in his. His hands were huge, scarred, calloused from decades of gripping motorcycle handlebars and God knows what else. But his touch was gentle, reverent almost. "The paramedics told us what happened out there on 880, Brick said softly, the harshness leaving his face entirely. "They said you held his artery closed for 20 minutes in the freezing rain. They said you refused to leave him even when—" He trailed off, but I knew what he wasn't saying, even when the killer came back. "You saved his life," Brick continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't know him. You didn't owe him anything. But you stopped. You stayed. You fought for him." My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. I just did my job. No. Brick shook his head slowly. You did more than that. A lot more. You have the respect of this club little sister. All of us. And we don't forget debts like this. Ever. Before I could process the weight of his words, before I could even begin to understand what having the respect of the Hells Angels actually meant, the automatic doors slid open again. Two men in cheap suits walked in flashing gold detective badges to the overwhelmed security guards. They moved with the kind of casual arrogance that cops develop after years on the job. The lead detective was in his early 40s, with slicked back hair that was just starting to gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it smiled maybe once a year. His name tag identified him as Detective Warren Briggs, Oakland, PD. Briggs's eyes swept the room, taking in the 40 bikers, the terrified hospital staff, and finally landing on me. His lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disdain that he probably didn't even know he was making. Evangeline Brennan, Briggs asked, pulling a small notepad from his jacket pocket. That's me. I need to take your official statement regarding the accident on Interstate 880. Brick took a half step back, folding his massive arms across his chest. He didn't leave. He didn't go sit down. He stood close enough that Briggs would have to physically move him if he wanted privacy. Which, judging by the flicker of irritation in Briggs's eyes, he very much did want, but he wasn't stupid enough to try. I nodded. Okay. Briggs gestured toward the hallway leading to the cafeteria. Let's find somewhere quieter. I led him and his partner, a younger detective, who hadn't said a word, to a corner table in the mostly empty hospital cafeteria. It was nearly 5 in the morning. The only other people there were a janitor mopping the floor and a surgical resident asleep face down on a table with a half-eaten sandwich next to his head. I sat down. Briggs sat across from me. His partner stood arms crossed, trying to look intimidating, and mostly just looking bored. Walk me through what happened, Briggs said, clicking his pen. So I did. I told him about the 14-hour shift, about driving home in the rain, about seeing the motorcycle pass me, then hearing the crash, about running to help, about the injuries, about the bleeding. And then I told him about the SUV. It wasn't an accident. I said, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that someone had handed me at some point. The coffee was cold now. I didn't care. The car that hit him drove away, but then it came back. Briggs's pen stopped moving. Came back. Reversed, fast, like the driver realized what they'd done and wanted to help. I paused. But that's not what happened. What did happen, Ms. Brennan? The driver got out. He had a weapon, a tire iron. He walked toward us. He wasn't in shock. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, deliberate. He was going to finish what the crash started. Briggs exchanged a glance with his partner. It was the kind of look that said he thought I was either lying or hysterical. Probably both. Ms. Brennan, he said slowly, like he was talking to a child, you were in an extremely high-stress situation. It was dark. It was raining. You were focused on providing medical care. It's very easy for the mind to misinterpret. I didn't misinterpret anything, I snapped, anger cutting through the exhaustion. He had a tire iron. He walked toward us with intent. I saw his face clearly in my headlights. If I hadn't bluffed about the police already being on the line, he would have killed both of us. Briggs sighed the long-suffering sigh of a man who'd heard 1,000 traumatized witnesses tell 1,000 exaggerated stories. All right, what did he look like? Tall, maybe 6 feet, lean build, dark trench coat, and he had a scar. A scar. Through his left eyebrow, jagged, like an old knife wound, and a tattoo on his neck. The moment those words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the cafeteria shattered like dropped glass. Detective Briggs stopped writing. His pen hovered over the paper, frozen mid-word. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. A single drop of sweat formed at his temple and rolled down the side of his face. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He looked at his partner. The younger detective had gone just as pale. They stared at each other for 2 full seconds, a look of pure, unadulterated panic passing between them. A tattoo? Briggs choked out, his voice suddenly hoarse. What kind of tattoo? A coiled rattlesnake, I said, watching his reaction with growing unease. Wrapped around a dagger, very detailed, very distinctive. Why do you know him? Briggs closed his notebook. Fast, like it had suddenly become radioactive. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor with a harsh screech that made the sleeping resident jerk awake. "We'll look into it," Briggs said quickly. Too quickly. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Brennan. Do not leave town. We may have follow-up questions." And then he and his partner practically sprinted out of the cafeteria. I sat there alone staring at the cold cup of coffee in my hands. Confusion warred with a sudden icy knot of dread forming in my stomach. Why had Detective Briggs reacted like that? Why had a simple description of a tattoo made a seasoned cop look like he'd just seen a ghost? A heavy hand rested gently on my shoulder. I jumped, spinning around so fast, I almost knocked over the coffee. Brick Maddox was standing behind me. He'd been listening from the shadows near the vending machines, close enough to hear every word, but far enough to stay out of Briggs's line of sight. The chapter president's face was grim. His jaw was locked in a tight, furious line. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "I know who that tattoo belongs to," Brick said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Who?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "His name is Hector Salazar, street name Viper. He's the top enforcer for the Los Santos cartel. They've been trying to push their fentanyl through our territory at the Oakland port for the last 6 months. Declan was the one blocking their shipments. He personally shut down 3 major deliveries, cost them millions." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The Los Santos cartel. I just interrupted a cartel assassination. I'd looked a professional killer in the eyes and bluffed my way out of my own execution. "But the detective," I stammered. He looked terrified when I described the tattoo. "Why would—" Brick's eyes darkened with a terrifying rage that I was suddenly very glad wasn't directed at me. "Detective Warren Briggs is on the cartel's payroll. It's an open secret on the streets. Internal Affairs has been trying to build a case against him for 2 years, but he's careful. He's smart, and he's dirty as hell." The full weight of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave of ice water. The killer knew there was a witness. He knew I'd seen his face, seen his tattoo. And now the corrupt cop on the cartel's payroll knew my name, my face, and exactly where I worked. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hands starting to tremble so violently that I dropped the coffee cup. It shattered on the linoleum floor, hot liquid and ceramic shards exploding everywhere. "They're going to come for me." Brick stepped in front of me, a human wall of leather and muscle and barely contained violence. He pulled his phone from his pocket and pressed a single button, raising it to his ear. "Yeah, it's me," Brick said into the phone, his eyes never leaving the cafeteria entrance. "Call every charter, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Vallejo, Sacramento. I don't care if they're sleeping. I don't care if they're 200 miles away. Tell them Code Thunder. Tell every single brother to get down to Oakland General right now. Lock down every entrance, every exit, the parking garage, the loading docks, everything." He hung up. Then he looked down at me, and his expression softened just slightly. "They might come for you, Eva," Brick said, and it sounded like a vow, like an oath sworn on blood and iron. "But they're going to have to go through 500 Hell's Angels to get to you." By 5:30 in the morning, Oakland General Hospital had ceased to be a place of healing and had transformed into something else entirely. A fortress, a stronghold, a line in the sand that said this far and no further. It started as that low rumble, that vibration I'd felt in my bones when the first 40 angels had arrived. But this was different. This was an earthquake. The walls shook. The windows rattled in their frames. The fluorescent lights flickered. Coffee cups walked across tables from the sheer resonance. They came in waves. The first wave rolled in from San Jose at 5:45. 80 riders, their engines synchronized into a single deafening roar that echoed through the concrete canyons of the medical district. They parked in formation in the south lot, dismounted, and took up positions at every entrance on that side of the building. The second wave arrived from San Francisco at 6:15, 100 strong. They blocked off the north entrances, the emergency vehicle bay, and the pedestrian walkways. No one was getting in or out without going through them. Sacramento sent 70 riders who arrived just before 7. They secured the parking garage, all 6 levels of it, positioning men at the stairwells and elevator banks. And from Vallejo, Fresno, Stockton, even some nomads from out of state who happened to be passing through Northern California, they came. 40 here, 30 there, 20 more. By 7:30 in the morning, there were over 200 heavily armed, leather-clad men standing shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable human perimeter around Oakland General Hospital. I watched it happen from the fourth-floor window of the staff break room. The sun was starting to rise, burning off the morning fog, and in the pale gray light I could see them. Rows and rows of motorcycles. Harleys mostly, customized chromed, each one worth more than my annual salary. And standing beside each bike, a man who looked like he'd walked out of a nightmare or a legend, depending on your perspective. Dr. Catherine Vale found me there, still wrapped in my thermal blanket, still wearing scrubs that were stiff with dried blood. "Eva," she said softly, "you need to eat something. Drink some water. You are in shock." "I'm fine," I lied. Catherine sat down beside me. She was quiet for a long moment, just looking out the window at the army assembling in the parking lot below. "I've worked in this hospital for 26 years, she finally said. "I've seen gang violence, drug wars, shootings in the ER, but I have never seen anything like this." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to bring this here. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't." Catherine turned to look at me, and her expression was fierce. "Don't you dare apologize for saving a life. Don't you dare. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, what you were trained to do, what your sister would have wanted you to do." Tears burned in my eyes. I blinked them back. "But now those men down there are risking their lives for me," I said. "People I don't even know. And that man Salazar, he's a professional killer. If he comes back, if he gets through them, people are going to die. Because of me." "No," Catherine's voice was hard as steel. "Because of him. Because of the people who sent him. You are not responsible for the evil that other people choose to do. You're only responsible for the good you choose to do in response. And you chose to stop. You chose to help. That's all that matters." Before I could respond, the door to the break room burst open. Brick Maddox filled the door frame, and behind him stood Garrett Stone, the sergeant-at-arms I'd heard someone call Grizzly. Garrett was a mountain of a man, 6'3", and built like a linebacker with a full red beard and knuckles that looked like they'd broken more noses than I could count. "We need to move you," Brick said without preamble. "This break room has windows, 2 exposed. We're taking you down to the sublevel." "The sublevel?" I repeated numbly. "Pharmacy storage," Garrett rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. "No windows, 1 entrance, steel door with electronic lock. We can defend it." Catherine stood up. "I'll come with her." "No, Doc," Brick said, not unkindly. "With all respect, we need you up here. Declan's going to need post-op care, and if things go sideways, this hospital is going to need every surgeon it's got. Eva will be safe. You have my word." Catherine looked at me. I nodded. She squeezed my shoulder once hard, and then she was gone. I followed Brick and Garrett out of the break room through the staff corridors, past wide-eyed nurses and doctors who pressed themselves against the walls to let us pass. We took the service elevator down below, the main hospital below the basement, into the sublevel where the hospital kept bulk supplies, old medical equipment, and apparently witnesses the cartel wanted dead. The pharmacy storage room was exactly as advertised. Windowless, concrete walls, shelves upon shelves of medications, IV fluids, surgical supplies. The air smelled like antiseptic and cardboard. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Garrett positioned himself outside the heavy steel door. 2 other angels joined him, men I didn't know with road names I didn't catch. They were armed. I could see the outlines of handguns under their leather cuts. Brick stepped into the room with me and closed the door. For a moment, we just stood there in the humming silence. Then he reached into his cut and pulled out a handgun. A Colt M1911, matte black, heavy and cold-looking. He held it out to me. "I don't know how to use that," I said, taking a step back. "It's not complicated," Brick said. "Safety's already off. You hold it like this." He demonstrated both hands wrapped around the grip, arms extended. "You point it at what you want to stop, and you pull the trigger. The recoil is going to kick, so keep your grip firm." "I can't. I'm a nurse. I save lives. I don't—" "I know," Brick interrupted gently. "And I'm not asking you to go looking for trouble. But if someone comes through that door who isn't wearing our patch, you don't ask questions. You don't hesitate. You defend yourself. Understand?" My hands were shaking as I took the gun. It was heavier than I expected. The metal was cold against my palms. I'd never held a weapon before. The weight of it felt wrong, obscene, but I nodded. "How long do we have to stay down here?" I asked. "My sergeant-at-arms is on a secure line with a clean contact at the FBI in San Francisco. Special Agent Rachel Holloway. She's one of the good ones. Not on anyone's payroll. She's arranging protective custody for you at a federal safe house in the Presidio. But it's going to take a few hours to set up. We just need to keep you breathing until the feds get here." "And Declan, what about him?" Brick's expression softened. "Declan's out of surgery. Dr. Vale says he's stable. Still critical, but stable. He's got a long road ahead, but he's going to make it. Because of you." "I need to see him," I said suddenly. "I need to know he's okay. I need to—" "You need to stay here where it's safe," Brick said firmly. "Declan would tell you the same thing if he was awake. Hell, he'd probably yell it. The best thing you can do for him right now is survive. That's the only thing that matters." I wanted to argue, but I was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted that I could barely think straight. I sank down onto an overturned plastic crate, still holding the gun awkwardly in my lap. Brick moved to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "you did something last night that most people wouldn't have the guts to do. You stopped for a stranger. You fought for him. You stared down a killer. That takes a kind of courage that can't be taught. Declan's lucky you were there. We all are." Then he was gone, and I was alone in the windowless concrete room with nothing but my thoughts. A gun I didn't know how to use, and the growing certainty that Hector Salazar wasn't going to wait for the FBI. I don't know how long I sat there. Time moved strangely in that room. No windows meant no sunlight, no natural sense of day or night. Just the fluorescent buzz and the distant muffled sounds of the hospital above me. I used the time to do what I do best. I assessed my surroundings. I made a plan. The pharmacy storage room was a treasure trove if you knew what you were looking for. And I did. I'd spent 5 years working in emergency medicine. I knew exactly which medications could incapacitate, which could slow someone down, which could kill. I stood up, tucked the gun into the waistband of my jeans at the small of my back, like I'd seen in movies, and started surveying the shelves. Sevoflurane, a volatile anesthetic gas used for surgical sedation. In liquid form, undiluted, it was extremely potent. Inhalation of even a small amount could cause rapid loss of consciousness. I found 3 one-liter bottles on the top shelf and moved them to a lower, more accessible position. Potassium chloride, used in IV fluids to treat electrolyte imbalances. But in a concentrated injection directly into the bloodstream, it would stop a heart in seconds. I found a box of vials and placed them within arm's reach. Morphine sulfate, high-dose opioid. Would slow reflexes, cloud judgment, suppress respiratory drive. Not immediately lethal in most cases, but enough to give me an advantage if I needed one. I wasn't planning to kill anyone. The thought made me sick. But I was planning to survive. And if Hector Salazar came through that door, I was going to use every tool at my disposal. I just finished my inventory when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy boots. Multiple people. I froze my hand instinctively, going to the gun at my back. The electronic lock beeped. The steel door swung open. It was Garrett, and he looked grim. "Brick wants you upstairs. Declan's awake. He's asking for you." Relief flooded through me so suddenly I felt lightheaded. "He's awake. He's talking." "Barely, but yeah, come on." I followed Garrett back to the elevator, back up, through the hospital to the ICU on the 3rd floor. The intensive care unit was quiet, the kind of oppressive quiet that comes with controlled chaos. Machines beeped. Ventilators hissed. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency between curtained bays. Declan Gallagher was in bay 7. He looked small in the hospital bed, which was absurd because the man was easily 250. But hooked up to machines draped in white sheets with an oxygen cannula in his nose and IV lines running into both arms, he looked fragile. Human. His eyes were open. Barely. Glassy with pain medication, but open. Brick stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. When I entered, he nodded once and stepped back, giving me space. I approached slowly, like Declan was a wild animal that might spook. "Hey," I said softly. "I'm Eva. I'm the one who on the highway I know," Declan rasped. His voice was rough, damaged, probably from the breathing tube they'd had down his throat during surgery. "Brick told me. You saved my life. I just did what anyone would do. No. He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. Most people don't stop. Most people drive past, but you stopped. You stayed, even when he came back. So he knew about that too. Of course he did. Why did they try to kill you? I asked the question, spilling out before I could stop it. Brick said something about the cartel about shipments, but I don't understand. Why you? Declan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were clearer, harder. The Los Santos cartel has been trying to move fentanyl through the port of Oakland for almost a year. It's a strategic location, close to the highways, easy access to the rest of the state. They've been using legitimate shipping containers, hiding the drugs inside electronics, furniture, whatever. But the port is our territory, has been for decades. We have people who work there, longshoremen, truckers, security. They report to us. He coughed, a wet, painful sound. I reached for the water cup on his bedside table and held the straw to his lips. He took a small sip and continued. I personally intercepted 3 major shipments in the last 6 months. 50 kilos the first time, 80 the second, 120 the third. Street value, we're talking millions of dollars per shipment. I didn't keep it, didn't sell it, I burned it. Every last brick. Sent a message that Oakland wasn't for sale. So they decided to send a message back, I said quietly. Yeah, last night was supposed to be my execution. They knew my route home. They knew I'd be alone. They ran me off the road and Salazar was supposed to finish the job. Make it look like a motorcycle accident in bad weather. No witnesses, no questions. But I stopped. But you stopped, Declan echoed, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across his cracked lips. You threw a wrench in their whole plan. Now Salazar's been seen, identified, and you're a witness who can put him at the scene, prove it wasn't an accident. The cartel can't let that stand. So what happens now? Now we keep you alive long enough for the feds to take you into protective custody, Brick interjected from behind me, and we make sure that when this goes to trial, you're still breathing to testify. Declan reached out with his left hand, the one that wasn't splinted and bandaged. His fingers were cold when they wrapped around mine. I owe you everything, he said. My life, my brother's respect, a second chance. You gave me all of that. So whatever happens next, whatever you need, you've got 500 brothers who will go to war for you. That's a blood debt. And we always pay our debts. I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say when a dying man you saved promises you an army? I squeezed his hand gently. Just focus on healing. That's all I need from you right now. He nodded, his eyelids already drooping. The pain medication was pulling him back under. Within seconds, he was asleep again, his breathing deep and even. Brick gestured for me to follow him out of the ICU. We walked in silence back toward the elevator. How much time do we have? I asked as we descended. FBI says they can have a secure transport ready by noon. 1,200 hours, but... He trailed off. But Salazar's not going to wait that long. He knows we've locked down the hospital. He knows the longer he waits, the more reinforcements we get, the harder it's going to be. If he's going to make a move, it'll be soon, within the next few hours. Then why don't we just leave now? Get in a car and drive to the Presidio ourselves. Brick shook his head. Too risky. The moment we try to move you in anything less than a full convoy, we're vulnerable. Open highway, no cover, just you and maybe a handful of escorts against however many guns Salazar can bring to bear. No, we wait for the feds. We do this right. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. We stepped out into the main hallway, and I immediately felt a change in atmosphere. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Every staff member looked terrified. Security guards clustered near the exits, radios crackling with overlapping chatter. And then I saw why. Through the glass doors of the main entrance, I could see 3 Oakland Police Department cruisers pulling into the circular drive. Lights off but moving with purpose. And stepping out of the lead vehicle was Detective Warren Briggs. Brick saw him too. His jaw tightened. Get back to the sublevel. Now. What's he doing here? Nothing good. Go. Garrett will meet you at the elevator. I didn't argue. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard Brick's voice, low and dangerous, calling out to his brothers. Front entrance. Now. Nobody gets through. I made it to the service elevator just as Garrett emerged from a side corridor. He grabbed my arm, not roughly but firmly, and pulled me inside. Hit the button for the sublevel. The doors closed. What's happening? I asked, my heart pounding. Briggs is here with a warrant, Garrett said. Or at least that's what he's going to claim. He's going to try to take you into custody, says it's for your own protection, says he needs to move you to the precinct for a formal deposition. But that's a lie. Yeah, we know. Brick knows, but Briggs has a badge and we don't. Legally, he's got the authority, which means this is about to get very complicated. The elevator descended. My mind raced. If Briggs took me, I was dead. He'd hand me over to Salazar the moment we were out of sight of the hospital. But if the Angels physically stopped a police detective from doing his job, that was assault on a law enforcement officer. That was jail time. That was giving the cartel exactly the excuse they needed to dismantle the Oakland charter. We reached the sublevel. Garrett led me back to the pharmacy storage room, but this time he came inside with me. So did two other Angels I didn't recognize. They positioned themselves on either side of the door, hands resting on concealed weapons. No matter what you hear, Garrett said, looking me dead in the eyes, you do not open this door for anyone except Brick, me, or someone wearing our patch. I don't care if they say they're FBI. I don't care if they say they're the president. You do not open this door. Understood? I nodded. Garrett handed me a small two-way radio. Channel 3, keep it on. If something happens, if you hear gunshots, you hit the transmit button and you say your location. We'll come for you. Garrett, I said as he turned to leave, please don't let anyone get hurt because of me. He paused in the doorway. Little sister, we've been in worse situations than this, and we've always come out the other side. Today won't be any different. Then he was gone and the steel door locked behind him with an electronic beep that sounded horribly final. I sank down onto the same plastic crate I'd sat on before, pulled the radio close, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The radio crackled occasionally with brief transmissions I couldn't quite make out. Then at 9:45 in the morning, all hell broke loose. The radio erupted with overlapping voices, shouting, not panicked but urgent, controlled chaos. Front entrance, we got cops pushing through. Briggs is demanding access to the sublevel. He's got 2 uniforms with him, hands on their weapons. Hold the line, do not engage unless. And then a new voice cut through, a woman's voice, high and terrified, bleeding through what sounded like the hospital's PA system. It wasn't an announcement. It was a raw, unfiltered scream. Someone had gotten into the security office. My blood ran cold. Briggs at the front door was a diversion. While everyone was focused on the confrontation in the lobby, Salazar had slipped in somewhere else. Somewhere unguarded. The radio crackled. Brick's voice hard as iron. All units, we have a breach. Repeat, we have a breach. Unknown entry point. Assume hostile. Eva, if you can hear this, lock that door and do not open it for anyone. I was already moving. I grabbed one of the heavy metal shelving units and dragged it in front of the door. It scraped across the concrete floor with a horrible shriek. I grabbed another shelf, pushed it against the first, created a barricade. Then I went back to my makeshift arsenal, grabbed the bottle of sevoflurane, unscrewed the cap. The sharp chemical smell hit me immediately. I poured half the bottle onto a surgical towel, held it at arm's length. One weapon. Not great, but better than nothing. My other hand found the Colt M1911 at the small of my back. I pulled it free, held it like Brick had shown me. Both hands, arms extended, pointed at the door, and I waited. The minutes stretched like hours. My arms started to shake from holding the gun. My eyes watered from the sevoflurane fumes. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears, a drum solo of pure terror. Then I heard it, outside in the hallway, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end, a suppressed gunshot. Not loud, just a muffled thwip like someone hitting a pillow. Then another thwip. Then the heavy sound of a body hitting the floor. Oh God, no. The guards outside, Garrett, the others, they were down. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood, trying to keep from screaming. Had to stay quiet, had to stay hidden. Maybe whoever it was didn't know I was in here. Maybe they'd move past, check other rooms, give me time to... The electronic lock beeped. Someone had a key card. The steel door swung open, shoving against the shelving units I'd barricaded it with. They didn't budge much, maybe 6 inches, but it was enough for me to see through the gap, and enough for me to see him. Hector Salazar stepped into view. He'd ditched the trench coat. Now he wore dark surgical scrubs, the kind doctors wore in the OR. He'd wrapped a white bandage around his neck, covering the snake and dagger tattoo. To anyone passing him in the hallway, he'd look like just another hospital employee. But I knew. I knew exactly who he was. In his right hand, he held a pistol with a long suppressor attached. His left hand pushed against the door, testing the barricade. "Little nurse?" Salazar called out, his voice, a dry, terrifying rasp that echoed in the concrete room. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." I didn't respond, didn't move. My finger hovered over the trigger of the Colt, but my hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could hit him even at this range. "You have terrible luck," Salazar continued almost conversationally. "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong person to save. But you seem like a smart woman, so I'm going to give you a choice. You can open this door, walk out peacefully, and I promise I'll make it quick. Painless. You won't even know it happened." He paused as if waiting for me to respond. When I didn't, he sighed. Or he continued, "I can force this door open, drag you out, and make you suffer for every second of inconvenience you have caused me. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. My mind raced. The barricade wouldn't hold, not against a grown man with leverage and motivation. The moment he got through, he'd have a clear shot. I had one advantage. He didn't know exactly where I was in the room, didn't know if I was armed, but I couldn't shoot him. Even knowing he was a killer, even knowing he was here to murder me, I couldn't pull the trigger. I was a nurse. I saved lives. I didn't end them, which left me with exactly one option. I set the gun down on the shelf beside me, picked up the sevoflurane-soaked towel in my left hand, grabbed an empty glass IV bottle in my right, pressed myself flat against the wall beside the door where I'd be hidden when it swung inward. "Time's up," Salazar said. He slammed his shoulder into the door. The shelving unit scraped backward another foot. Supplies rained down, bottles of saline and medication crashing to the floor. He hit it again. Again. The metal shrieked in protest. On the fourth hit, the gap was wide enough. Salazar squeezed through sideways, his suppressed pistol sweeping the room, looking for targets. He didn't see me immediately. I was behind him, hidden in his blind spot. I had maybe 2 seconds before he turned. I didn't think. I just moved. I lunged forward and slapped the sevoflurane-soaked towel directly over his nose and mouth, using both hands to press it tight against his face. He jerked backward, shocked, trying to twist away. His gun hand swung toward me. I slammed the glass AV bottle into his wrist as hard as I could. The glass shattered. He dropped the gun. But he was stronger than me. So much stronger. His hand shot up, grabbed my wrist, and yanked the towel away from his face. He sucked in a breath, preparing to shout to call for help, to do something. That breath was his mistake. He'd inhaled a massive dose of undiluted sevoflurane vapor. Not the carefully measured, controlled amount used in surgery. A toxic, overwhelming amount. The effect was almost instantaneous. His eyes went wide. His pupils dilated to the size of dinner plates. His grip on my wrist loosened. He stumbled backward, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. "What?" He slurred, his voice thick and confused. "What did you—" His nervous system was shutting down. Fast, his knees buckled. He crashed heavily to the concrete floor, scattering broken glass and scattered medication. His eyes rolled back in his head. His body went completely limp, unconscious, paralyzed, down. I stood there gasping, the sevoflurane towel still clutched in my shaking hands. My entire body was trembling. My vision was blurring with tears. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I'd taken down a professional killer with a bottle of anesthetic and dumb luck. I heard running footsteps in the hallway, heavy boots pounding on concrete, multiple people. The door burst open. Brick was first through, followed by Garrett and a dozen other angels. They had weapons drawn, ready for war. They found Hector Salazar unconscious on the floor, and me standing in the middle of a disaster zone of broken glass and scattered medical supplies covered in chemical burns, where the sevoflurane had splashed on my skin, crying and shaking but alive. Brick looked at Salazar, looked at me, looked at the shattered bottle still in my hand. Then slowly a grin spread across his face, a genuine, deeply respectful grin. Remind me, he said, never to piss you off in a hospital. I dropped the towel, my legs gave out. I sat down hard on the concrete floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and sobbed. Garrett moved to Salazar, checked his pulse, then zip-tied his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. He's alive, breathing, out cold, but alive. Good, Brick said. FBI's going to want him breathing. He's evidence. 2 angels. I didn't know dragged Salazar's limp body out of the room. Brick crouched down beside me, his voice gentle. Ava, look at me. I raised my head. My face was wet with tears. You did good, Brick said. Better than good. You just took down the Los Santos cartel's top enforcer with a bottle of medicine. That's going to be a story for the ages. I didn't kill him, I whispered. I couldn't. I'm not. I know. And that says everything about who you are. He stood up, offered me his hand. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. And then we need to move. Salazar getting in means our perimeter isn't as tight as we thought. We can't stay here. Where are we going? Presidio, the feds are ready for us, but we're not taking a car. We're not taking a van. We're doing this the only way that makes sense. He helped me to my feet, led me out of the ruined pharmacy storage room past the spots where Garrett and the other guards had been shot, though I was relieved to see they were wounded, not dead, already being treated by hospital staff. We took the elevator back up to the ground floor, but instead of heading to the exit, Brick led me to a different corridor to the surgical wing. Dr. Catherine Vale was waiting outside OR3. Her face was pale, her scrubs spotted with fresh blood. Eva, she said when she saw me, thank God you're okay. What's wrong? I asked, my stomach dropping. Catherine's expression was grim. It's Declan. He crashed about 20 minutes ago. His right lung collapsed. Second pneumothorax. We tried to stabilize him medically, but he needs an emergency thoracotomy. Now. But every surgeon in this hospital is in the middle of critical cases. 3-car pileup on 580 just came in. I don't have anyone. How long does he have? Brick asked, his voice tight. Minutes, maybe 10. His oxygen saturation is dropping fast without immediate intervention. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Brick's jaw clenched. What do you need a surgeon? Catherine said. Then she looked at me. Or a trauma nurse who's assisted me on 50 thoracic procedures. Who knows every step of the protocol? Who can guide me through it? The world seemed to slow down. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel Brick's eyes on me. No, Brick said immediately. Eva needs to get to the Presidio. The FBI transport leaves in less than an hour. If she stays, if Salazar's people send backup, if the cartel makes another move? I know, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. I know the risks. I continued, my voice stronger now. I know every minute I stay here is another chance for them to come for me. I know the smart thing, the safe thing is to get in that ambulance and go. I looked at Catherine, at Brick, at Garrett standing behind them. But I didn't hold Declan's artery closed for 20 minutes in the freezing rain just to let him die now because I was in a hurry to save myself. Brick stepped forward. Eva, this is your life we're talking about. Declan would tell you to go. He'd order you to go. Then it's a good thing he's unconscious and can't, I said. I turned to Catherine. How long will the procedure take? 30 minutes if everything goes perfectly. 45 if it doesn't. I thought about Jenny, about 17 people who kept driving, about the oath I'd made 5 years ago. Then we need to start now, I said. Catherine nodded once, sharp and professional. Or 3. Scrub in, I'll prep him. Brick grabbed my arm as I started to follow her. You're sure about this? I met his eyes. I'm sure. Something shifted in his expression. Respect maybe, or understanding. Then we locked down this floor. Nobody gets into that OR except medical staff. We'll hold the line. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just save him. Again. I followed Catherine into the surgical prep room, scrubbed my hands and arms with the practiced efficiency of thousands of repetitions, pulled on a sterile gown and gloves, tied a surgical mask over my face. Through the window, I could see Declan being wheeled into OR3. He looked even worse than before. His skin was gray. The monitor showed his oxygen saturation dropping. 78%, 75, 72. We were running out of time. Catherine and I entered the OR. A surgical nurse I didn't know was already positioning instruments. An anesthesiologist stood at the head of the bed monitoring Declan's vitals with growing concern. "Talk me through it," Catherine said, as she positioned herself on Declan's right side. "Every step. I'll be your hands. You'll be my brain." I took a breath, became the professional. Fifth intercostal space. Right side. We need to access the pleural cavity and reinflate the collapsed lung. Scalpel. The nurse handed Catherine the blade. Catherine looked at me. I nodded. She made the incision. Clean, precise. Blood welled up immediately. "Retractors," I said. "We need to spread the ribs without fracturing them." Gentle pressure. Catherine worked with steady hands. The ribs separated, revealing the chest cavity beneath. And there it was. The collapsed lung deflated and useless pressing against the mediastinum. The cause was immediately visible. A small tear in the pleural lining, probably from a broken rib fragment during the initial surgery. "I see it," Catherine said. "We need to deflate the remaining air pocket first," I instructed. "Chest tube 16 French. Insert at an angle, aim posterior and superior." The nurse handed Catherine the tube. I watched as she positioned it, her movements careful and controlled. "Good," I said. "Now advance it slowly. 3 centimeters. 4. Stop." The tube was in place. Catherine connected it to the suction system. Immediately, we heard the hiss of escaping air. Declan's oxygen saturation stopped dropping, held steady at 71%. "Now we reinflate," I said. "Disconnect the suction. We're going to manually ventilate through the tube while the anesthesiologist increases positive pressure ventilation." It took 23 minutes. 23 minutes of careful, coordinated work. Catherine's hands following my instructions. The anesthesiologist adjusting in pressure. The surgical nurse anticipating our needs before we asked. And slowly, incrementally, Declan's collapsed lung began to reinflate. The monitors told the story. Oxygen saturation climbed. 75, 80, 85, 92. When it hit 95 and held steady, Catherine let out a breath I didn't know she'd been holding. "We got him," she said. I looked at the clock on the wall. We'd been in the OR for 40 minutes. Outside, Brick and his brothers had been holding the line, keeping me safe while I did what I'd been trained to do. Save lives. Catherine secured the chest tube, closed the incision with rapid but precise sutures, and stepped back. "He's stable. Better than stable. You just saved his life." Again. I pulled off my mask. My hands were shaking. "Can we move him?" "Not for at least another hour. He needs to be monitored." "I don't have an hour." Catherine understood immediately. "Then go. I'll stay with him. I'll make sure he knows what you did." I stripped off the gown and gloves, scrubbed out, and emerged from the OR to find Brick waiting. He took one look at my face and knew. He's going to make it. He's going to make it. Brick shook his head slowly. "Most people would have run. You stayed. Twice." He gestured toward the elevator. "Now can we please get you to safety before you decide to save someone else?" I almost laughed. Almost. "Yeah, now I can go." We took the elevator back down, emerged into the main lobby where the confrontation with Briggs had apparently ended. The corrupt detective was nowhere to be seen. Probably fled when he realized the infiltration had failed. Brick led me to the front entrance, pushed open the glass doors. And there, spread out across the parking lot, the surrounding streets. Every available piece of pavement was in the army. 500 Harley-Davidson motorcycles. 500 men in leather and patches. They'd come from every corner of California. Some had ridden all night. Some had left their moms, their families, their lives because the call had gone out. Code Thunder. And they'd answered. In the center of the formation, protected by rings and rings of bikes and bodies, sat a heavy armored ambulance. Its rear doors were open, waiting. Brick gestured toward it. "Your ride, little sister." I looked at him. At the army he'd assembled. At the men who were willing to risk everything for a woman most of them had never met. "Why, Washosh?" I asked. "Why all of this? I'm nobody. I'm just a nurse who stopped on the highway." Brick's expression was serious, solemn. You're not nobody. You're the woman who saved our brother when she had every reason to keep driving. You're the woman who stared down a killer to protect someone she didn't know. You're the woman who stood her ground when most people would have run. And then when you finally had a chance to save yourself, you risked your life one more time to save him again. That makes you family, and we protect family. Always. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Now, come on. We've got a bridge to cross and a federal safe house waiting. Time to bring the thunder. I'd never been inside an armored ambulance before. From the outside, it looked like a standard emergency vehicle. White paint, red striping the caduceus symbol on the sides. But the moment I stepped through those rear doors, I understood that this was something else entirely. The windows were small and reinforced with steel mesh. The walls were lined with Kevlar panels. There were jump seats along both sides, medical equipment, secured in lock cabinets, and in the center, a stretcher with full life support capabilities. This wasn't an ambulance built for transport. This was an ambulance built for war zones. Brick climbed in after me, followed by FBI Special Agent Rachel Holloway. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that had seen too much and trusted too little. "Ms. Brennan," she said, extending her hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "You and me both." "The safe house at the Presidio is secure," Rachel continued, settling into one of the jump seats. "Federal marshals are already on site. Once we get you there, you'll be under 24-hour protection until we can arrange more permanent witness protection." The rear doors of the ambulance slammed shut. The engine rumbled to life. Through the small, reinforced window, I could see the sea of motorcycles beginning to organize into formation. Road captains were shouting orders, directing traffic, creating structure out of chaos. Brick pulled out a handheld radio and keyed the transmit button. "All units, this is Brick. We are Oscar Mike. I say again, we are Oscar Mike. Formation Delta, tight box. Nothing gets within 50 feet of this rig. Advanced scouts, I want every intersection locked down before we reach it. Sweep teams watch for tail vehicles. We ride for blood brothers. Stay sharp." A chorus of acknowledgments crackled back through the radio. The ambulance lurched forward. We were moving. I pressed my face to the small window and watched as the motorcycles fell into position around us. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mob. It was a precisely coordinated military formation that would have made a Marine Corps convoy proud. The innermost ring, maybe 30 bikes, formed a tight protective box directly around the ambulance. Close enough that I could see the individual faces of the riders, their eyes constantly scanning hands near hidden weapons, every muscle coiled and ready. The second ring, another 50 bikes, created a wider perimeter. These were the shock troops, the ones who would engage any threat before it could reach the center. Beyond that, waves of riders spread out in a diamond pattern, with advanced scouts racing ahead to block intersections, off-ramps, cross streets, anything that could potentially allow a threat vehicle to merge into the convoy. And at the very edges, roving patrols of 10 or 15 bikes constantly circling, watching for tail vehicles, looking for ambush positions. 500 men, 500 machines, all moving as one. We rolled through downtown Oakland like a mechanical storm. Traffic simply stopped. Cars pulled to the side of the road. Pedestrians stood on sidewalks with phones out, recording their mouths open in shock. I saw a group of construction workers stop mid-pour concrete, forgotten, just staring at the spectacle. The convoy didn't stop for red lights. The advanced scouts physically blocked intersections with their bikes, their bodies daring anyone to challenge them. Not a single horn honked in protest. Not a single driver tried to force their way through. You don't argue with 500 Hell's Angels. "I've been with the Bureau for 19 years, Rachel said quietly, also watching through the window. "I've overseen dozens of witness protection transports, federal convoys with armored cars and helicopter support, but I have never seen anything like this." "They're protecting me," I said, still not quite believing it myself. "All of this because I stopped on a highway." "No," Brick corrected from across the ambulance. "All of this because you honored a code most people forgot exists. You saw someone in trouble and you didn't look away. You didn't make excuse. You didn't assume someone else would handle it. You stopped. In a world that teaches people to mind their own business and keep their heads down, you stopped. That's worth protecting." The radio crackled. A new voice, young and tense. "Advanced scout to Brick, we are approaching the Bay Bridge on-ramp. Highway Patrol has been notified of our transit. They are not attempting to interfere. Bridge approach is clear. Copy that, Brick replied. All units, we are entering the funnel. This is where they'll hit us if they're going to hit us. Titan formation, weapons hot, watch your sectors. My stomach dropped. You think they're going to try to stop us on the bridge? I know they are, Brick said grimly. The Bay Bridge is a perfect ambush point. It's narrow, 4 lanes of traffic with concrete barriers on both sides. No escape routes, no room to maneuver. Once we're on that bridge, we're committed. If the cartel has any resources left to throw at us, that's where they'll deploy them. Rachel checked her service weapon, a Glock 22, and chambered around. How many are we expecting? No idea, Brick admitted. Could be 2 guys in a car. Could be a dozen. Salazar was their top enforcer, but the Los Santos cartel has deep pockets. They can hire replacements. The ambulance merged onto the approach to the Bay Bridge. Through the window, I could see the massive suspension cables rising into the gray sky. The bridge stretched out ahead of us, a seemingly endless ribbon of concrete and steel suspended over the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. The convoy tightened, the bikes compressed around the ambulance until I could have reached out the window and touched the nearest riders. They were so close I could see the patches on their cuts. Oakland, San Jose, San Francisco, Fresno, Sacramento, brothers from across California riding wheel to wheel. We were halfway across the bridge when it happened. 2 matte black armored SUVs, heavy Chevy Suburbans with reinforced bumpers and tinted windows came barreling down the opposite lane. They weren't following traffic patterns. They were driving against the flow, swerving between concrete dividers, accelerating directly toward the head of our convoy at what had to be 70 miles per hour. Contact, someone screamed over the radio. 2 vehicles, westbound lane, moving against traffic. They're coming right at us. The rear windows of both SUVs dropped simultaneously. Rifle barrels appeared. AR-15S, maybe M4S, the distinctive black tactical weapons favored by cartel enforcers. And then they opened fire. The sound was deafening even from inside the armored ambulance. Rapid staccato bursts of automatic weapons fire echoed across the bridge. Bullets sparked off concrete, shattered windshields. I saw one of the advance riders take around his bike, wobbling as he clutched his shoulder. But his brothers were there immediately, 2 riders flanking him, physically holding him upright, keeping him from going down. Return fire, someone shouted over the radio, but Brick was already countermanding the order. Negative, do not engage with firearms. Civilians on this bridge, I say again, do not engage. Execute maneuver Delta 7. I had no idea what Delta 7 meant, but apparently every rider in that convoy did. 20 motorcycles at the vanguard of the formation, the biggest bikes ridden by the biggest men, suddenly accelerated. They didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. They drove directly toward the oncoming SUVs like cavalry charging into cannon fire. What are they doing? I screamed, unable to look away from the window. They're going to get killed. Watch, Brick said, his voice tight with controlled fury. The 20 riders converged on the first SUV in a coordinated assault that was part demolition derby, part precision driving. They boxed the vehicle in bikes on all sides, moving at matching speed. Then in perfect synchronization, they kicked. Heavy reinforced boots slammed into the SUV's front tires. Steel-toed foot pegs, the metal bars riders rest their feet on, were driven into wheel wells and steering components with devastating force. Not once, not twice. A sustained, coordinated barrage of impacts targeting the most vulnerable parts of the vehicle. The physics were simple and brutal. A Harley-Davidson touring bike weighs between 700 and 800 pounds. 20 of them attacking simultaneously represented over 7 tons of force being applied to critical mechanical systems at highway speeds. The SUV's driver lost control. The front tires, battered from multiple angles, couldn't maintain traction. The vehicle swerved violently to the right, clipped the concrete barrier in a shower of sparks, and then the inevitable happened. At 70 miles per hour, even a minor loss of control is catastrophic. The SUV hit the barrier at an angle, the front end catching and lifting. The rear end came around. The entire vehicle went airborne for one impossible moment, 2 tons of steel suspended against the gray sky. Then it came down on its side and started to roll. Once, twice, 3 times, metal shrieking, glass exploding outward in glittering clouds. It rolled end over end down the bridge like a massive, violent pinwheel, shedding parts with each impact. A door, a bumper, the entire rear gate. It finally came to rest on its roof 100 yards behind our convoy's smoke, pouring from the engine compartment. Flames began to lick from underneath. The second SUV, seeing the fate of the first, slammed on its brakes. Tires screamed. The vehicle fishtailed wildly, the driver fighting to bring it under control to throw it into reverse to escape. But they were already surrounded. Hundreds of motorcycles swarmed the SUV like sharks circling wounded prey. They didn't attack. They didn't need to bow. They just boxed it in, giving the driver nowhere to go, no avenue of escape. Cartel gunmen inside must have realized the futility of their situation. The rear doors burst open. 3 men in tactical gear tumbled out. Hands raised, weapons dropped. They were immediately tackled by a dozen bikers, zip-tied and left face down on the asphalt. Far behind us, I heard sirens. California Highway Patrol, probably. FBI, Homeland Security. Every law enforcement agency in the Bay Area was about to descend on this bridge. But the ambulance never slowed, never stopped. We kept moving the convoy, reforming around us, filling the gaps left by the confrontation, maintaining the protective box. All units sound off, Brick commanded over the radio. I want damage reports. The responses came back one by one. 3 riders injured, none critically. 1 bike totaled, 2 more with significant damage but still mobile. Out of 500 men and machines, that was the cost. Continue to Presidio, Brick ordered. Medical units tend to wounded on the move. We are not stopping until we're inside federal jurisdiction. Rachel was on her phone speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. Yes, sir. Shots fired on the Bay Bridge, multiple cartel operatives in custody. We are en route to Presidio ET. 10 minutes. She paused, listening. No, sir, the witness is unharmed. The Hells Angels handled the situation. She hung up and looked at Brick with an expression I couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or disbelief. My supervisor wants to know if you're interested in consulting for federal protective services. Brick snorted. Tell your supervisor we work for family, not bureaucrats. The Presidio came into view. The historic military base, now a federal park and home to several government facilities, sat at the northern tip of the San Francisco Peninsula. High fences, guard towers, armed military police at every gate. The convoy slowed as we approached the main entrance. An Army captain in the dress uniform stood at attention, flanked by a dozen MPS with M4 carbines held at low ready. He looked utterly bewildered as 500 motorcycles rumbled to a halt in front of his checkpoint. Brick leaned out the ambulance window. We have a federal witness for protective custody. FBI Special Agent Rachel Holloway can verify. Rachel held up her credentials. The captain examined them, made a phone call, waited for confirmation, and finally nodded. You're cleared to enter. The witness and the agent only. The rest of you need to remain outside federal property. Understood, Brick said. The gates opened. The ambulance rolled forward, and for the first time since leaving Oakland General, we separated from the convoy. I watched through the rear window as the 500 riders stayed behind engines idling, watching us disappear into the secure compound. The ambulance parked in front of a nondescript concrete building. Rachel opened the door. And Rachel opened the doors. Welcome to your new temporary home, Ms. Brennan. I stepped out onto federal soil. The air smelled different here. Salt from the bay, pine trees, the faint scent of gunpowder from a nearby firing range. It smelled like safety. Brick climbed out after me. This is where I leave you, little sister. The reality of that statement hit me harder than I expected. You're not staying. Can't. I've got brothers to debrief, wounded to check on, and a whole lot of explaining to do to the FBI about what just happened on the Bay Bridge. But you're safe now. That's all that matters. He reached into his leather cut and pulled out something small. A pin, silver about the size of a $50, shaped like a winged skull. The death's head, the symbol of the Hells Angels. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. You saved one of our own. You stood your ground when you had every reason to run. You fought back when most people would have given up. And then you risked everything one more time when you could have walked away. That makes you family now. Honorary member of the Oakland Charter. I don't know what to say. I whispered, tears burning in my eyes. Don't say anything. Just know this. His voice was fierce, absolute. Anywhere you go in this world, if you ever need anything, you show that pin. You tell them your family, and we will come. 5 guys, 50 guys, 500 guys, however many it takes, we will come. That's a blood oath, and we never break our oaths. He pulled me into a brief, crushing hug. Then he stepped back, nodded once to Rachel, and climbed back into the ambulance. I watched as it rolled back through the gates, back to where the convoy waited. Watched as Brick emerged and mounted his own motorcycle. Watched as 500 engines roared to life in a thunderous symphony that echoed across the Presidio and out over the bay. And then they were gone, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the fading rumble of distant thunder. Rachel touched my elbow gently. Come on, let's get you inside. You've had a hell of a day. The next 8 weeks passed in a blur of depositions, grand jury testimony, and protective custody. I lived in a series of safe houses, always with federal marshals nearby, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hector Salazar was in federal custody charged with attempted murder conspiracy and a dozen other felonies. His bail was denied. He sat in a cell awaiting trial, and every day he sat there, the Los Santos cartel lost money, lost territory, lost power. Detective Warren Briggs had been arrested the same day. FBI agents had raided his home and found evidence of cartel payments going back 3 years, bank accounts in the Caymans, encrypted communications. A whole second life built on blood money. He was looking at 25 years minimum. Don Miguel Reyes, the cartel boss himself, had vanished, fled to Mexico probably. The DEA had issued warrants, but actually catching him would take years, maybe decades. Declan Gallagher recovered slowly but steadily. I got updates through Rachel. He'd been moved to a federal medical facility, undergone 2 more surgeries to repair complications from the thoracotomy, but he was alive. He was healing, and according to the reports, he asked about me constantly. The trial was set for late March, nearly 3 months after that night on the highway. The prosecution's case was airtight. My testimony was the centerpiece, the eyewitness account that would tie everything together. Salazar at the scene, the tire iron, the deliberate attempt to finish what the staged accident had started. I was terrified. Testifying meant facing Salazar again. It meant reliving that night in front of a jury, defense attorneys, the media. It meant putting a target back on myself that had just started to fade. But I'd made a promise. To Declan, to Brick, to the 500 men who'd risked their lives to get me here. I was going to see this through. The federal courthouse in San Francisco was a fortress. Metal detectors, armed marshals, snipers on the roof. They weren't taking any chances. I sat in a witness waiting room wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. Rachel sat beside me reviewing my testimony one final time. Remember, she said, just tell the truth. Answer the questions you're asked. Don't elaborate. Don't speculate. Just the facts as you witness them. I remember. You're going to do fine, Eva. You've been through worse than a courtroom. The bailiff opened the door. Ms. Brennan, they're ready for you. I stood, smoothed my skirt, took a breath. The courtroom was packed. Press in the gallery, sketch artists, federal prosecutors at one table, defense attorneys at the other, and behind the defense table in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, Hector Salazar. He stared at me as I walked to the witness stand. Those same dead eyes, but now there was something else there. Hatred, pure, concentrated hatred. I didn't look away. I'd faced him once with nothing but a bottle of anesthetic and a prayer. I could face him now with the full weight of the federal government behind me. I was sworn in, took my seat, and for the next 3 hours I told my story. The accident, the injuries, the SUV returning, the tire iron, the scar and the tattoo. Every detail exactly as it had happened, exactly as I remembered it. The defense attorney had tried to rattle me, suggested I was mistaken, suggested the darkness and the rain had confused me, suggested I had a financial motive to lie that the Hells Angels were paying me. I shut him down calmly, professionally. I was a trauma nurse with 5 years of experience assessing patients in high-stress situations. I knew what I saw. And no, I hadn't received a single dollar from anyone. This wasn't about money, it was about justice. When I finally stepped down from the stand, I felt lighter, emptied out, like I'd been carrying a weight for months and had finally set it down. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hector Salazar was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Warren Briggs got 25 years. Three other cartel operatives who'd been arrested in connection with the Bay Bridge attack got 10 to 15 years each. The Los Santos cartel's pipeline through Oakland was dead, burned to ash, and it would take them years, maybe decades, to rebuild what they'd lost. I walked out of that courthouse into the spring sunshine, Rachel beside me, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe. 3 weeks later, I got a message through Rachel. Declan Gallagher had been released from the federal medical facility. He was walking with a cane, still had months of physical therapy ahead of him, but he was out. He was free, and he wanted to see me. The meeting was arranged at a small bar in Oakland, a biker-friendly place called the Iron Horse. Rachel drove me there in an unmarked federal vehicle, though by this point, my protective custody had officially ended. I was a free woman. The cartel had bigger problems than one witness now that their entire Northern California operation had collapsed. I walked into the Iron Horse at 7 in the evening. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, neon beer signs, a jukebox in the corner playing classic rock, pool tables, and leather. So much leather. 30 or 40 Hells Angels were already there. I recognized some faces from the hospital, from the convoy. Garrett Stone was at the bar. He raised a beer in my direction when I entered. And at a corner table sitting with his cane propped against the chair was Declan Gallagher. He stood when he saw me, wincing slightly at the effort. I crossed the room and he pulled me into a careful hug, mindful of his still healing ribs. "You look good," I said, stepping back to assess him. And he did. Color back in his face, weight back on his frame, alive. "I look like I got run over by a truck," Declan corrected with a slight smile. "But I'm vertical. That's more than I had any right to expect." Brick appeared from the back room, accompanied by 2 other men carrying something covered with a tarp. They set it on the pool table and pulled the tarp away. It was a leather vest, a cut, but not a standard one. It was custom-made, perfectly sized for someone my height and build. Black leather expertly crafted. And on the back, beautifully hand-stitched, was the winged death's head. Above it, a rocker that read Oakland. Below it, another rocker, Lifesaver. "Honorary member," the Brick said, his voice carrying across the now silent bar, "with all the rights and protections that come with it. Your family now, Eva. Official." I couldn't speak, couldn't find words. I just ran my fingers over the stitching, the leather, the weight of what this represented. "There's only been 3 honorary members in the history of the Oakland Charter," Declan said quietly. "A lawyer who got 12 of our brothers out of a bad prosecution in the 70s. A doctor who treated our wounded during a gang war in the 80s when no hospital would touch us. And now you, the nurse who stopped. They helped me put it on. It fit perfectly. The weight of it settled on my shoulders like armor, like belonging." The bar erupted in applause, bikers pounding on tables, whistling, shouting approval. Someone bought a round for the entire bar. Someone else fired up the jukebox and classic Lynyrd Skynyrd poured out. I spent the next 3 hours there drinking beer. I didn't finish listening to stories, laughing at jokes I didn't fully understand but appreciated anyway. These men, these warriors, these outlaws, they'd accepted me as one of their own. When I finally left, Brick walked me to my car. My beat-up Honda Civic looked absurdly out of place in a parking lot full of chrome and custom paint jobs. "You good?" Brick asked. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I'm good. You ever need anything, you call. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter when." "I know." He nodded, satisfied, and headed back inside. I drove home through the Oakland night, the leather cut folded carefully on my passenger seat. When I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I noticed something I'd noticed every night for the past month. A motorcycle, a Harley, parked across the street in the shadows where the streetlight didn't quite reach. A different bike every night, a different rider, but always there. I climbed out of my car, looked over at the shadow where the bike sat. I couldn't see the rider's face, didn't need to. I knew what the patch on his back would say. I raised my hand, a small wave. Acknowledgement. The shadowed figure nodded, just once. "I see you, I'm here, you're safe." I smiled and headed into my building. 6 months later, I was back at Oakland General, back on the ER floor. back in the chaos and the blood and the endless parade of broken bodies that needed fixing. But something was different now. I was different. I wore the silver death's head pin on my scrubs right over my name badge. The other nurses asked about it sometimes. I just smile and say it was a gift from a friend. Dr. Catherine Vale knew the truth. She'd pull me aside occasionally and ask how I was really doing. If I was sleeping, if the nightmares had stopped. They had mostly. Some nights I still saw Salazar's dead eyes. Some nights I still felt the cold rain on the highway. But those nights were getting fewer. I'd started volunteering with the Hells Angels Charity Foundation. They did more community work than people realize. Toy drives for underprivileged kids, food banks, support for families of incarcerated members. I helped organize medical clinics, free health screenings for people who couldn't afford regular care. It felt right. It felt like purpose. Declan recovered enough to ride again, though he'd never be quite the same. The leg injury had ended his career as road captain. Too much metal, too many surgeries. But he'd taken on a new role mentoring younger members, teaching them the codes, the traditions, the honor that separated the club from just another gang. We got coffee sometimes, talked about that night, about how a random moment, a split-second decision, had changed both our lives forever. Do you regret it? He asked me once. Stopping that night, everything that came after. I thought about it, really thought about it. The fear, the violence, the months of looking over my shoulder, the nightmares, the trial. No, I said finally, I don't regret it, because if I hadn't stopped, you'd be dead, and I'd have become the 18th person who drove past someone who needed help. I'd have become the thing I hate most. So no, no regrets. Declan smiled, raised his coffee cup. To no regrets. To no regrets, I echoed. Now, almost a year after that night on Interstate 88, oh, I live a strange double life. By day, I'm Evangeline Brennan, trauma nurse, dedicated professional, the woman who holds hands with dying patients and fights like hell to keep them in this world. By night, sometimes I'm Eva, honorary member of the Hells Angels, the woman with an army of brothers who'd burn the world down to keep her safe. I've been to club events, barbecues, charity rides where hundreds of bikes roll through the streets and kids line up to sit on the motorcycles and take pictures. I've learned the hand signals, the road etiquette, the unwritten codes that govern this world. And every single night when I drive home from my shift, I look for the shadow, the motorcycle that watches over me, my guardian, my brother. They rotate who takes the duty. Sometimes it's Garrett. Sometimes it's younger members earning their respect. Sometimes it's Brick himself checking in, making sure I'm okay. I'm never alone. I'm never unprotected. And I'm never ever taken for granted. People ask me, sometimes other nurses, friends from before, why I associate with motorcycle clubs, why I wear that pin, why I attend their events. Don't I know they're dangerous? Don't I know their reputation? I just smile, because I know something they don't. I know that on the worst night of my life, when a professional killer stood 5 feet away with a tire iron and murder in his eyes, it wasn't the police who saved me. It wasn't the government. It wasn't the system. It was a man named Brick who made a phone call. It was 500 riders who dropped everything and came when the call went out. It was an army of outlaws who put their bodies between me and death and said, not today. So yeah, I know they're a reputation. I know what people say. And I know the truth is more complicated than the stories. They're not saints. They'd be the first to admit it. They're flawed, violent, sometimes criminal men who live by their own code in a world that doesn't always make sense. But they're also loyal, honorable in their own way, and they pay their debts. 1 year ago, I stopped on a rainy highway for a dying stranger. I held his artery closed with my bare hands. I stared down a killer. I refused to run, and in return, 500 lives swore to protect mine. They ask me if I have regrets. I tell them no, because sometimes your one choice, your one moment of courage becomes the thing that defines everything that comes after. And sometimes when you save one life, 500 lives swear to save yours back. That's not a debt. That's not an obligation. That's family. And family, as Brick told me, that first night in the hospital is everything. I park my Honda Civic in my usual spot, grab my bag, lock the doors, and before I head inside, I look across the street one more time. The Harley is there. The shadow is there. My brother is there. I raise my hand. He nods. I'm home. I'm safe. I'm protected. And tomorrow I'll go back to the ER. I'll save more lives. I'll hold more hands. I'll be the person who stops when others keep driving. Because that's who I am. That's who Jenny taught me to be. That's who 500 Hells Angels risked everything to protect. I'm Evangeline Brennan, trauma nurse, honorary member, the woman who stopped, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it.